Right, good evening, everybody. This is Ken Long from Tortoise Capital, and I'm going to record the third and final follow-up of the strategic thinking and systems thinking workshop tonight. And I want to cover just a number of process models and problem-solving models that I have found to be very useful and helpful in developing systems and effective decision-making processes. So these are like my favorite models. I come back to these time and again. So the first one I want to talk about is this idea. Michael said I missed the follow-up of the first half and second half. I'll see if I can't get you that link. If you would send me an email, Michael, I'll go ahead and shoot that both recordings to you, the links. So the first thing I want to cover then is the central idea of answering the question, what's the nature of the market? And this is connected to some other problem-solving models that we're going to see here next that come to us from Harvard Business Review. And this is really more of a specific categorization scheme about the market for traders. And what I have observed over time through descriptive and really statistically based descriptions of the market, I find it useful to break it into 5 categories: simple, complicated, complex, chaotic, and random. And the idea behind this classification is that depending on which type of market you think that you're in, based on evidence, then there are different strategies that are appropriate for you to try to find and then exploit an edge. And so the way to read this chart is we'll describe it. We'll talk about whether it's dynamic or not, what kind of process is appropriate for responding to it, and then what kind of a strategy should you be maybe considering, and then what kind of analytical process for understanding it at a deep level, and then what does that kind of approach value above all other things? What's the tiebreaker, if you will? And my hypothesis is that the market moves through these different phases periodically, and that if you have a market classification scheme that allows you to identify these kinds of markets, then you can adapt your portfolio strategy accordingly. So these little descriptions basically follow that kind of outline. Simple markets are ones I would describe as closed systems, very linear, predictable. They don't seem to change much. They're static. And in this kind of a market, the instinct to follow old traditional rules is a pretty good process, because it should those should have been habits that evolved over time to be successful. And as long as the market remains in that kind of pattern, it's going to be very hard to improve upon instinct. The strategy that you would have then is to turn the instinct into trained, repeatable, efficient, and effective behaviors that eliminate waste. And that what you want is a process of analysis to determine which elements of that market you want to respond to and which offer the best predictable returns. And then the value would then be on speed and precision in terms of identifying opportunities and then executing carefully to standard. In complicated models or in complicated markets, you still have closed and linear systems. I'd like you to think of a Swiss watch in this case. Only now what we have is, because of many more moving pieces which behave according to rules, you still have a static market, but what you need is a rational understanding of all the moving pieces and how they fit together in predictable ways. In the same way that an engineer can take apart an engine, understand the pieces and how they fit together, and then get a deep understanding of the power that can come out of that engine. And so you still want to be applying an analytical process to understanding that market so you can see which pieces contribute the most value and where the control points are. And that's what we would value, is the ability to control that powerful, complicated, yet predictable, closed, unchanging system. So you don't have to worry about your car engine morphing underneath the hood and becoming something that it wasn't yesterday. I mean, it's going to remain powerful but static. A complex system is or can be closed, but it doesn't have to be. It's quite often associated with a network in the sense that it has many pieces like a complicated one, but that the relationships are not purely linear, that they are dynamic and changing. They can evolve over time. You have second and third order effects are more prevalent. A systems thinking approach is what's called for here, so that you can see all the relationships and the strength of those connections and the type of feedback loops that can be found between agents or elements or nodes of that network system. You want an adaptive process so that as the network, especially if it's open, so that as that network evolves and adapts to the larger environment, that your approach can be adaptive and can learn from changes in the environment to make changes in your system. Modeling is usually a good strategy to do here. It begins with a system flow diagram, perhaps, or a control diagram that shows influences and relationships. And we want to value learning so that we can sense and respond to changes in the market, compare them against previous experiences, and then determine if we need to adapt a new system or simply pull out a reliable recipe for success in the new organization that we see inside that complex market. The next market type would be chaotic, and so as we move to the right, we're adding details and variability and making it harder and harder to completely understand everything that's going on. And so in a chaotic market, what you have is something that seems to be based on rules and follows those rules, but where the sensitivity to initial conditions is such that we cannot predict with certainty where this thing is going to go next, that there are too many variables to allow for complete computation. And so we typically have a dynamic process, and that we want a process that can morph as quickly as the market itself seems to be shape-shifting. And sometimes your strategy has to be, in this case, metaphorical to understand or to describe what the problem seems to be using a metaphor in order to suggest ways in which we might effectively act. We're looking usually to find a balanced process that allows us to gain some advantages without going overboard, because we know how quickly and non-linearly that market may change. We don't want to overcommit. We want to make sure that we always have an out, and so typically that sense of balance is going to be involved with hedging, measured risks, insurance, and protection, more so than maybe grabbing for home runs and big wins. And finally, what we would value there is the ability to make sense out of the patterns that seem to be emerging. So the ability to rapidly identify and then exploit a pattern as it develops. Even though that may be the only time we see that pattern, we're really talking about one-off sense making, because we're not expecting patterns to repeat. And then finally, it's a short leap now to purely random markets, ones that may behave according to rules that we cannot infer, but where we have evidence to believe that, based on results, that there is some deep underlying order that's driving the market, even if we can't comprehend it. And so in probabilistic markets, we have an uncertain type of market in which we can't tell what the underlying drivers are in the black box. We may have some ideas, but we may not be able to prove them beyond a statistical level of confidence. And so we want to be analytical about those. We want to calibrate our models as a function of the variability of data. And we want to be disciplined in how we apply the approach, and disciplined to make sure that we don't extrapolate beyond the region of fit, meaning that we don't try to infer too much predictability or control when all we can perhaps do is use statistical descriptions of what we've seen so far, particularly in non-standard distributed markets, and we know financial markets are like that, that we don't want to overfit our statistical models and try to leverage too much on the basis of past behavior. Taleb's fourth quadrant problems would be instructive in this area. All right, so if we can just hold that idea for a moment and say that's what markets look like. This comes from a Harvard Business Review article by Hugh Courtney and a couple other authors that talk about 4 basic categories of futures, and I think you'll see that this aligns pretty well with what we just described. And so a clear enough vision of the future says that if there is only one way you see that future unfolding, that what you're really looking for is the best course of action that seems to get you the most efficient and effective results, and that there is a very clear strategy that comes to dominate. I would treat that as sort of the simple market from the last example. A level 2 degree of complexity is one in which we can see that there are a defined limited set of possible future outcomes, and only one of those is going to occur, like a set of mutually exclusive possible scenarios. And in those, we might weigh up the probabilities and consult our values and explore how our strategy might work in each of those 3 categories, and then pick a strategy on the basis of how maybe it gets the most opportunity out of any of those or minimizes the amount of regret we might have associated with any scenarios that comes true. So we are able to distinguish between a limited set of possible futures, and then we can engineer our responses with pretty careful control measures. Level 3 is one in which a complete range of futures is possible, and that typically we would think of that as a future state could occur anywhere on that horizon, or on that quarter of the circle right there. And so when that occurs, we probably are not capable of computing each and every point on the curve to see how all of our scenarios or all of our proposed strategies might work. And so what we try to do is describe a set of representative sample scenarios, and try to see how our strategy choices might work on these representative samples out here, and then we can infer how well they might do in the space in between. So there are just too many possible scenarios to compute them all. So what we want to do is make sure that our range of scenarios then can be said to be a representative sample or a fair sample of the solution space, so that we have considered broadly and widely enough to make sure that we're not surprised by what actually occurs. And I would equate this to the complex kind of market system that I described in the last slide. This last one, level 4 uncertainty, would be one in which none of the past performance gives any kind of indication about where the market might go. I would treat this as either truly chaotic or really probabilistic, because we don't have definitive evidence on what is the underlying principle that's organizing the market. So this is the case where, much like in complex situations, we're trying to do sense making, and we treat each condition as its own unique, possibly one of a kind, never to be repeated again scenario, and we try to describe the scenario in such a way that we can make a one-time sensible play if we can describe and manage to the risk that we identify. So Courtney and his authors really talk about depending on which level of complexity that you diagnose yourself to be in, that you have a different strategy that's appropriate that aligns with the nature of the degree of uncertainty. So that's the main idea there. So like a golfer has a variety of places he could be on the golf course, and then he picks the club based on his read about where he is. Okay. So if those are the choices of market types, then what this is suggesting is, I'll zoom this up a little bit so we can see. It was just a little too hard to read there, so bear with me for a second. So to go one level deeper then, we would say that in clear futures, you really just need a single forecast with enough precision to determine the particular strategy that will get you to your carefully defined objective point. And so traditional strategies are usually okay. And then an example might be which of the precious metals are doing well, or which commodity should be doing the best, or which country or region of the world is doing well, and then stay with the winners. In the alternative futures, again, there's a few specific discrete outcomes defining the future, and we use decision analysis and consider what the different payoffs might be for the different strategies that we propose, and see how those competing strategies work in scenario 1, 2, or 3, and then we can use some decision analysis to decide what it is that we want it to. In level 3 complexity, we're talking about, again, a range of possible outcomes, no natural scenarios, and so we're going to try to pick some representative samples that describe regions of these different solutions. And then we might look for ways of uncovering deep demand, or what they're called latent demand research, and that is residual price and support and resistance levels that might activate people who are on the sidelines. And where we might do some forecasting either of technology or scenarios or currencies in order to prefer one strategy or another as we see how they all unfold in these different scenarios. And then in the last one, under true ambiguity, we don't have any justification in trying to forecast the future from past results. It really is a one-off world, or a unique set of conditions that must be judged and measured and seen as opportunities on their own merit. So sense making, again, would be very highly prized in that type of a world. So once we've decided what our basic situation looks like, we can take one of 3 strategic postures. And this has to do with how much we want to bet. What's the size of the bet? And so in shaping the future, what that idea says, looking to get first mover advantage and try to influence the market to go in your direction based on how you act in that market. You're trying to set the conditions, trying to set the agenda. You got to be large to do that, or first and very visible. The second one is an adaptation to the future, and that's one in which where you might do something like sector rotation and try to quickly adjust your position as the market backs and fills and cycles through different rotational leaders. The third option is this idea about reserving the right to play, and that's one in which you have enough money in to establish an initial position, but you reserve the right to play. You're waiting for things to develop for one clear winner to emerge before you commit the family farm to that investment. And so an option strategy or paying to play or buying initial positions and then seeking to scale would be appropriate. So taken collectively then, the Harvard Business School approach essentially is saying, identify the nature and extent of residual uncertainties. Figure out how uncertain that market is in the time frame that you're interested in. And then decide on a strategic posture, such as, do I want to try to be the first mover? Do I want to be engaged but adaptive? Or do I want to play a wait and see and just have enough in there so that I have the right to play? That's what I mean by strategic posture. So then building a portfolio of actions is simply taking actions that are appropriate for that strategic posture to begin building your positions and that are risk-reward framed. And then the fourth step, actively managing that strategy in order to continue to monitor. So if the level of uncertainty changes, you can backwards engineer and change your portfolio of actions and your strategic posture. So building a portfolio of actions could include, I should add just a little bit more on there, could be something like making big bets in which you are upfront about measuring the risk and you feel confident about the payoffs, and so there's no reason not to hold back and you just play with a large size as a function of the estimate of reward to risk that you and the probabilities of success that you estimated. Another one might be just buying some options that allow you the right to play later, so the minimizing the cost of playing and preserving the right to play through the use of low-cost options. And then a middle path might be one in which you take some initial positions and then look to scale using a combination of more seed capital and possible percentage of market's money from the trade that you've already been winning on. So that's what we mean by building a portfolio of actions. And you could do all those regardless of which market state that you find yourself in. And then finally, managing actively the strategy so that if the residual uncertainty changes, that you can then go through the cycle to decide if you need to change your posture, change the portfolio of actions, or change the targets. So there's this virtuous cycle of systematically looking at the market with through the lens of uncertainty, and then using your descriptions of uncertainty to decide what's the appropriate strategy. You might see us using the regression line fractal framework or the regression line crossovers, and combined with the Bollinger Bands and frog boxes in order to get disciplined, systematic, adaptive measurements of the market's behavior so that we can take effective action in that way. Shifting gears then, the modeling a systems approach to making decisions and to making trading. This is sort of my standard favorite one. The input process output model with feedback loops from output to process, and then from output to input, and from process to input, that operates as an entity, as an agent, as its own system. That whole thing operates inside a environment that has a direct effect on that system, but which that system cannot completely control. It might have some influence in form of feedback, but it doesn't. It's a tail that doesn't wag the dog. So this idea of the environment being the contextual frame of reference in which your particular system is seeking to achieve its goals gives us the input process output model of systemic behavior. And so the things that matter in that kind of a model are the purpose or the objectives of that system, the input process output system. What is the end state it's trying to achieve, so that we can look at those outputs and determine if we're actually measuring up to our own standard. We learn from systems thinking that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and that we can have different kinds of feedback loops in learning, usually dealing with the relationship between the nodes, but it can be reinforcing or it can be dampening. So it can be changing behavior or causing it to be satisfying. Boundaries and durations matter. So we want to know how much throughput or feed through we can get from the environment that affects our process. Are we subject to mutation? Can the environment come in here and disrupt our process, or can we take steps to safeguard it if it's working the way we want it to? We can think about the boundaries we set around inputs, process, output, and around the overall system and around the environment itself to be choices that we make, because they may not be necessarily a proper or optimal way or objective way in which that stuff should be defined. So we take care with defining those boundaries provisionally until we get some more feedback about what's actually going on in our model. We can think of hard systems as those systems that are dealing with material, manufacturing processes, structured processes, well-defined processes, ones that are measured of performance against a standard. We could think of soft systems as those being involved in the production of values, or in which there is high levels of human contact. That could be a type of soft system. We can think of evolutionary systems as one in which the outputs cause effects to occur on both the environment, the inputs, and the processes. And so there's a constant drive towards improvement. At the same time, the existing models are affecting the environment that we operate in. Finally, the last piece I want to talk about tonight is this idea of a decision-making system modeled after John Boyd's OODA loop, one in which we have actions that occur as a consequence of a decision to act, which was based on a hypothesis about what was the nature of the environment. We have this orientation, which is this large chunk that represents our contextual knowledge, both short-term and long-term, that helps us find problems, frame problems, and then solve problems according to the way we interpret the mission, the purpose, and then the nature of the environment. And so in that sense, the orientation is the most important and compelling part of this, because it is the lens through which we interpret the sense data that we get. We use that to make sense out of the direct experiential knowledge that we have. And so the way we decide to do that in the orientation and the way we organize our policymakers' decision-making becomes crucial. So there's a lot more that can be said on the OODA loop, the main idea being that you want to know what your model is and what things you think you need to use in order to make your decisions. Then you might conduct some experiments to see what happens if I reduce my news input or my crosstalk input or simplify my rule set. What are the outcomes on the basis of properly applying the new rule set over a statistically significant large enough sample that we can actually draw conclusions about changes in performance. But this is a pretty good representation of how Boyd thought and the way that the U.S. military has adopted it for creating success. So that's everything I wanted to cover. We're about 30 minutes into this. I want to open it up to Mike and Dennis real quick to see if they have any questions about any of the things I covered. And if not, then I'll turn off the recording and get this link processed and get it sent out to you guys. And I thank you for your patience, and I will get to the advanced swing course recording on Friday, and then send out all the links to this one and Fridays. So if seeing no questions, I'll declare this one closed and say thanks for playing along, and take good care. Take a look at, you should see something, I think, like handouts. You could probably, I think, download the slides I just used, and right from inside the frame, the workshop frame. Okay, so take good care, and then we'll see you guys in the chat room.